Of Florence, a city bathed in gold, where power flowed like the Arno River and art pulsed like a living heart. The Medici ruled here, their name synonymous with beauty, genius, and unimaginable wealth. But beneath the gilded ceilings of their palazzi and the quiet shadows of their workshops, and even within the hallowed halls of the Vatican, whispers of a darker truth circulated. Precious treasures, irreplaceable masterpieces did not always stay where they were placed. They vanished. Not spirited away by magic, but snatched by cunning hands, by desperate minds, by audacious thieves who dared to challenge the very might of the Medici themselves. Get ready to dive into the untold stories, the whispered secrets of 9 incredible art heists that rocked Renaissance Italy. Number 9. The Lost Da Vinci Diagram. The year 1485 shimmered with the promise of invention and the subtle hum of political tension in Florence. Leonardo da Vinci, a mind both brilliant and restless, had found himself drawn into the orbit of the powerful Medici family, though his grandest visions sometimes outpaced their practical needs. He kept a small, cluttered studio on a quiet street near the Santa Croce quarter, away from the bustling heart of the city, a place where ideas flowed as freely as the ink from his quill. Here, among anatomical drawings, botanical studies, and sketches of strange mechanisms, lay a particular parchment that he considered a monumental step towards conquering the skies. It was a large, intricate diagram nearly 4 feet across, drawn with an obsessive precision that made the paper itself seem alive. Titled The Flying Machine of Florence, it detailed a complex contraption of gears, wings, and levers, all designed to harness the power of man and wind for flight. Its edges were slightly curled from countless unrollings, and the ink, a rich sepia, showed the faint smudges of Leonardo's own thumbprints. This diagram was not for public display, and Leonardo had shared glimpses of it only with a select few, including Lorenzo the Magnificent, who saw its potential both for prestige and for military advantage, though the practical challenges of its construction seemed insurmountable at the time. The parchment was kept tucked away in a sturdy leather-bound portfolio, itself secured within a large wooden chest in a corner of the studio. The chest was not heavily guarded. Leonardo relied on the unassuming nature of his workshop and the general reverence for scholarly pursuits to protect his work. A single, aging wooden door with a simple iron latch served as the main entrance, and the windows, though shuttered at night, offered little resistance to a determined intruder. The aroma of turpentine and lamp oil usually filled the air, mingled with the faint scent of ink and aged paper. Giovanni Falco, a man whose name ironically meant falcon, but whose movements were more akin to a shadow, had been watching Leonardo's studio for weeks. Giovanni was not a Florentine by birth. He was a cunning agent in the employ of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, a rival power to Florence. Sforza was obsessed with military innovation and had heard whispers of Leonardo's genius for engineering. Giovanni's mission was simple: acquire any of Leonardo's designs that seemed to hold military potential, especially anything involving flight. He had posed as a merchant of fine silks, quietly observing the comings and goings from the studio, noting the late hours Leonardo kept, the infrequent visits from patrons, and the lack of a dedicated guard. He knew the chest, having seen Leonardo open it on occasion to retrieve other drawings. He also knew the rhythm of the city's watchmen, whose patrols were predictable and often hurried. The night Giovanni chose was dark and moonless, the kind that swallowed shadows whole. A light, insistent rain had begun to fall around midnight, drumming softly on the terracotta rooftops and further dampening the sounds of the city. Giovanni wore dark, practical clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. He carried only a small set of lock-picking tools, crafted with delicate precision and a length of sturdy cord. He approached the studio from a narrow alley, his soft leather boots making almost no sound on the wet cobblestones. The street was deserted, save for the distant cry of a night owl. He reached the wooden door, its iron latch a familiar silhouette in the gloom. With deft, practiced movements, he inserted his tools into the lock. A faint click, almost imperceptible against the gentle rain, signaled his success. The door swung inward with a faint groan. Inside, the studio was a cavern of deeper shadows. The air was cool and still, holding the scent of old paper and dust. Giovanni moved with practiced quiet, his eyes, accustomed to darkness, scanning the cluttered space. He located the wooden chest in the corner, a dark block against the wall. It was heavier than he anticipated, but the lock was simpler, a strong brass clasp that yielded to his tools with a slightly louder snick. His fingers brushed against the rolled parchments inside. He knew exactly what he was looking for, the largest, most tightly rolled scroll, the one that felt substantial and slightly thicker than the others. His fingers closed around it, pulling it free from its resting place. He didn't dare unroll it there, not in the darkness, not with the risk of discovery. He quickly replaced the other scrolls, closed the chest, and reset the latch on the door as best he could, hoping the subtle disturbance would go unnoticed. He slipped back into the rain, swept alley, the rolled diagram tucked securely inside his cloak. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, but from the thrill of success. He navigated the winding streets of Florence, avoiding the main thoroughfares until he reached a rented room in a nondescript inn near the Porta San Frediano. There, by the flickering light of a single candle, he unrolled the flying machine of Florence. The intricate details, the precise measurements, the sheer audacity of Leonardo's vision filled the small room. Giovanni knew he had acquired something truly extraordinary, a piece of genius that could shift the balance of power between rival states. He carefully re-rolled the parchment, securing it with the cord, and hid it deep within his travel pack. His departure from Florence was scheduled for dawn. The theft was discovered the following morning by Giacomo, Leonardo's young apprentice, who arrived at the studio to begin his daily chores. He noticed the slight looseness of the main door's latch, a detail that usually would not catch his eye, but on this particular morning, something felt off. He pushed the door open, the faint groan echoing in the quiet studio. Everything appeared to be in its place, the scattered charcoal sticks, the half-finished sketches, the pots of pigment. Then his gaze fell upon the wooden chest in the corner. Its lid, usually pressed firmly shut, was slightly ajar, a cold knot formed in his stomach. He rushed forward, fumbling with the clasp, and pulled the lid open. The topmost scroll, the one Leonardo had spent so many nights poring over, the one he had sometimes called the Dream of Birds, was gone. Giacomo's shout brought Leonardo himself hurrying from his sleeping quarters at the back of the studio. Leonardo, a man of profound contemplation, rarely showed outward emotion, but the sight of the empty space in the chest brought a rare flicker of raw disbelief to his eyes. He quickly surveyed the studio, his gaze sharp, assessing the disturbance. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. This was a thief of quiet skill, someone who knew what they were looking for. Leonardo knelt by the chest, running his fingers over the empty space. "The flying machine," he murmured, his voice low with a mix of frustration and resignation. He understood the implications immediately. This was not a random act of petty theft. This was industrial espionage, a targeted strike at his intellectual property, a challenge to the Medici's patronage. News of the theft spread quickly through the artistic and political circles of Florence, though it was largely confined to whispers among the elite. Lorenzo the Magnificent, upon hearing the news from Leonardo himself, was deeply displeased. He had invested in Leonardo's genius, and the loss of such a groundbreaking design was a blow to Florentine prestige and potentially to its military advantage. Lorenzo dispatched his most trusted security men, led by a stern, sharp-eyed captain named Messer Vittorio, to investigate. Vittorio questioned Giacomo, Leonardo, and anyone who might have seen anything unusual near the studio. The rain had washed away most tracks, but a few subtle details emerged: a faint, peculiar boot print in a patch of mud near the alley, a glint of metal that might have been a dropped tool, quickly dismissed as common refuse. The investigation, however, quickly reached a dead end. Giovanni Falco, the Milanese agent, had already made good his escape, carrying the stolen diagram securely hidden among bales of silk in a merchant's wagon heading north. The Florentine authorities, despite their diligence, had little experience with such a specific and targeted intellectual theft. They were accustomed to tracking down jewel thieves or art forgers, not shadowy figures interested in blueprints of flying machines. The motive remained shrouded in mystery for most, but Leonardo and Lorenzo both suspected a rival power, though they could not prove it. The flying machine of Florence was never recovered by the Medici. It disappeared into the hands of the Sforza court, where it remained a guarded secret, inspiring engineers for generations, but never quite leading to the realization of its grand promise in Leonardo's lifetime. The empty space in Leonardo's chest served as a constant reminder of the unseen threats that lurked beneath the surface of Renaissance splendor. Number 8. The Secret della Robbia Panel. The year was 1495, and Florence was gripped by a peculiar, almost feverish piety. The fiery sermons of Girolamo Savonarola echoed through the city, condemning luxury, vanity, and the very secular humanism that had fueled the Renaissance. In bonfires of the vanities, where people cast their precious artworks, fine clothes, and books into cleansing flames, had become a chillingly common sight in the Piazza della Signoria. Amidst this tumultuous spiritual landscape, the Della Robbia workshop continued its masterful creation of glazed terracotta reliefs, producing works of exquisite beauty that often adorned private chapels and public spaces. One such piece, a stunning blue and white panel depicting the Madonna of the Olives, was a prized possession of the Salviati family, distant relatives and longtime allies of the Medici. The Madonna of the Olives was not a monumental work, like some of the Della Robbia altarpieces, but its intimate scale lent it a profound sense of devotion. Measuring perhaps 3 feet by 2 feet, it showed the Virgin Mary, her gaze serene and sorrowful, cradling the infant Jesus. Behind her, a grove of olive trees, their leaves a soft green against the vibrant azure background, hinted at the Garden of Gethsemane. The detail was exquisite, each leaf and fold of drapery rendered with a delicate touch, the glazed surface shimmering softly in the candlelight. It was housed in a small, private chapel within the Salviati family's palazzo, a quiet space removed from the main living quarters. The chapel was accessed through a narrow, unassuming corridor, its door typically locked at night, though the lock itself was old and somewhat unreliable. The air in the chapel always carried the faint scent of beeswax and incense, a testament to daily prayers. Brother Anselmo, a friar from the Dominican order, had become a fervent disciple of Savonarola. His eyes, usually downcast in humble piety, now burned with a righteous fire. He saw the Madonna of the Olives not as an object of devotion, but as a dangerous symbol of worldly indulgence. Its beauty, its delicate artistry, its very existence in a private family chapel rather than a public church seemed to him a betrayal of God's simplicity. He believed that such objects led the faithful astray, fostering a love of earthly beauty over spiritual truth. His goal was not to sell the panel, nor to destroy it outright in a public bonfire, but to redeem it by removing it from the hands of the wealthy and placing it in a hidden purified space, or perhaps even breaking it into shards, scattering its fragments as a symbolic act of rejection. Anselmo had befriended a young novice named Marco, who served the Salviati family. Marco was impressionable, earnest, and deeply affected by Savonarola's preachings, though he lacked the friar's fanatical zeal. Anselmo had subtly, over weeks of conversation, painted a picture of the Salviati family's sinful accumulation of art, particularly the Madonna of the Olives, which he claimed was a distraction from true devotion. He convinced Marco that by removing it, they would be performing an act of spiritual purification, saving the family's souls even if they did not understand it. Marco, torn between his loyalty to the family he served and his fervent new faith, reluctantly agreed to help. The night of the theft was chosen to coincide with a large public sermon by Savonarola, which would draw most of the household staff and even some members of the Salviati family to the Piazza San Marco. The palazzo, usually bustling, would be sparsely populated, its main guards focused on the perimeter, not the interior chapel. A cool, crisp wind swept through the narrow streets, carrying the faint, distant echoes of Savonarola's impassioned voice. Marco, his heart pounding, discreetly left the chapel door unlocked just before evening prayers. He had hidden a small, sturdy wooden crate and some thick cloths behind the altar earlier in the day, hoping his preparations would go unnoticed. Anselmo, cloaked and hooded, slipped into the Salviati palazzo through a side entrance Marco had indicated. An entry used for deliveries, usually secured but easily bypassed with a key Marco had misplaced days earlier. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors with surprising speed, his eyes fixed on his sacred mission. The air in the palazzo was thick with the scent of roasted meat from the kitchens and the faint, sweet perfume of stale incense. He found the chapel door slightly ajar, just as Marco had promised. Inside, the Madonna of the Olives glowed faintly in the dim light filtering through the high windows. It seemed to him a siren call, a temptation. He worked quickly, his movements precise and purposeful. The panel was set into the wall, but not permanently mortared. It was secured by a series of hidden metal clips that Marco had explained to him. Using a small, specially fashioned tool, a sharpened piece of metal that resembled a chisel, Anselmo carefully pried open the clips, one by one. The terracotta was fragile, and he worked with agonizing slowness, fearing to chip or crack the delicate surface. A faint scraping sound filled the quiet chapel, barely audible above his own ragged breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the last clip gave way, and the heavy panel shifted. He carefully lifted it from its recess, cradling it in his arms. The cool, smooth surface felt strangely alive under his gloved fingers. Marco, waiting just outside the chapel, quickly helped him maneuver the panel into the wooden crate he had prepared. They wrapped it tightly in the cloths, cushioning it against any bumps. The crate was surprisingly heavy, requiring both their strength to lift. They moved through the palazzo like ghosts, their shadows dancing on the frescoed walls. They eventually reached the side entrance, where a small cart waited, disguised as a delivery vehicle for vegetables. They loaded the crate onto it, covering it with a canvas. Anselmo gripped the reins, his face grim but resolute. Marco, his face pale and eyes wide with a mixture of fear and conviction, watched him disappear into the night. The theft was discovered at dawn when the Salviati family's elderly chaplain went to the chapel for morning prayers. The empty niche where the Madonna of the Olives had rested for decades stared back at him like a gaping wound. He let out a gasp that quickly turned into a cry of alarm, summoning the household. The Salviati patriarch, a staunch supporter of the Medici and an admirer of fine art, was furious. His rage, however, was tinged with confusion. Nothing else had been taken. No jewels, no silver, no other art from the main galleries. Just this one panel from a private chapel. The initial investigation was clumsy. Guards scoured the palazzo, finding only the slightly disturbed lock on the side door and the faint tracks of a cart in the muddy courtyard. The Salviati family suspected a rival, perhaps someone seeking to embarrass them or undermine their standing with the Medici. They questioned their servants, but Marco, though visibly agitated, feigned ignorance, his eyes betraying nothing but weary innocence. He had played his part too well. News of the theft reached the Medici through their vast network of informants. And Lorenzo the Magnificent, though wary of Savonarola's growing influence, found the theft deeply unsettling. It was not just a loss of art, it was a challenge to the established order, a desecration of a private, sacred space. He sent his own agents to assist the Salviati family, their methods more subtle and far-reaching than the local guards. They noted the lack of traditional theft motives and the almost surgical precision of the removal. Whispers began to circulate about Savonarola's followers, but direct evidence was scarce. Brother Anselmo, meanwhile, had taken the Madonna of the Olives to a secluded, abandoned hermitage outside the city walls. There, in a small, damp cave that served as his new sanctuary, he smashed the terracotta panel into dozens of shards. The sound of the breaking ceramic was sharp in the quiet cave, a testament to his misguided zeal. He then scattered the fragments, burying some in the earth, tossing others into a flowing stream, believing he had cleansed the art of its worldly stain. The Madonna of the Olives was never recovered, its beauty literally fractured and scattered, a casualty of the volatile intersection of faith, art, and power in Renaissance Florence. Marco, haunted by his role, eventually left the Salviati service, disappearing into a quiet life in the countryside, forever carrying the weight of his pious betrayal. Number 7. Cellini's Silver Chalice. In the mid-16th century, under the firm hand of Cosimo I of Medici, Florence had found a new, grander stability. Cosimo, now Grand Duke of Tuscany, was a patron of the arts in his own right, often commissioning lavish works that showcased Florentine artistry and his own power. Among the most flamboyant and celebrated artists of his court was Benvenuto Cellini, a goldsmith and sculptor whose life was as dramatic as his creations. Cellini was a master of metalwork, renowned for his intricate designs and his ability to imbue even functional objects with breathtaking artistic flair. One of his recent commissions for Cosimo was a magnificent silver chalice intended for use at state banquets. The chalice, famously known as the Serpent's Embrace, was a masterpiece of Rococo extravagance. It stood nearly a foot tall, crafted from purest Florentine silver, its surface gleaming with a lustrous sheen. The stem was an entwined mass of meticulously sculpted serpents, their scales individually rendered, their heads rearing up to support the bowl. The bowl itself was etched with scenes from classical mythology depicting nymphs and satyrs in a bacchanalian dance. The rim was inlaid with tiny, flawless sapphires that caught the light with an ethereal blue glow. It was a testament to Cellini's genius and Cosimo's wealth, a true showpiece that sparkled even in the grandest halls. The Serpent's Embrace was typically displayed in the Grand Duke's private dining hall within the Palazzo Pitti, Cosimo's imposing new residence across the Arno River. This hall, adorned with vibrant frescoes and heavy tapestries, was usually under the watchful eyes of several guards during banquets. However, at night, after the feasting and revelry had ceased, the chalice would be carefully placed inside a custom-built, velvet-lined display cabinet in the corner of the room. This cabinet was robust, made of solid oak, but its lock, a simple key mechanism, was not as sophisticated as those protecting the Duke's true treasury in the deeper vaults. The air in the dining hall often lingered with the scents of roasted game, fine wines, and the sweet perfume of courtly ladies. Piero, a young, ambitious steward in the Grand Duke's service, had a secret vice gambling. His debts had grown steadily over the past few months, fueled by unfortunate bets on horse races and card games in the city's back alleys. He was a man of fine taste but meager means, and his desperation was growing with each passing day. He had seen the Serpent's Embrace countless times, marveling at its beauty, but now his gaze had shifted from admiration to calculation. The chalice, he knew, was invaluable, its silver weight alone significant, but its artistic merit made it truly irreplaceable. He reasoned that if he could just get enough money to clear his debts, he could escape Florence and start anew. He had observed the routines of the palace guards, the shift changes, the moments of inattention. He knew the cabinet's lock was older, less secure than the Duke's other protections. The night Piero chose was a bustling one. A visiting dignitary from Venice was being entertained with a late supper, and the palace staff were stretched thin, focused on serving and cleaning. The weather was unusually warm for the season, a balmy breeze wafting through the open windows of the dining hall, stirring the heavy draperies. This would, Piero hoped, make the guards more relaxed, less vigilant. He had managed to acquire a duplicate key to the cabinet months ago, a risky maneuver that had involved distracting a junior guard while he made a wax impression of the original. As the last guests finally departed, their laughter fading down the grand staircase, Piero stayed behind, feigning diligence as he supervised the younger servants clearing the tables. The regular guards began their final patrol of the dining hall, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. And Piero waited until they had rounded a distant corner, their voices receding into the grand hall beyond. The dining hall was briefly empty, save for a few tired servants beginning the arduous task of scrubbing the tables. Piero signaled to a trusted, equally desperate junior servant, Cosimo, who owed him a favor, and whispered a quick instruction. Cosimo was to extinguish the lamps in a far corner, ostensibly to prepare the room for the night, but in truth to create a pool of shadow around the display cabinet. In the sudden gloom, Piero moved with a speed born of desperation. He approached the cabinet, his hands trembling slightly, yet his movements were precise. He inserted the duplicate key into the lock. It turned with a soft, almost imperceptible click. He eased the heavy oak door open, the faint squeak swallowed by the rustle of tablecloths being gathered. The chalice, bathed in the faint light filtering from the distant chandeliers, seemed to glow from within. He reached in, his fingers brushing against the velvet lining, and carefully lifted the silver masterpiece from its stand. It was heavier than he expected, its cool metal radiating a quiet power. He quickly wrapped it in a thick linen cloth he had secreted in his tunic, muffling its distinct shape. Cosimo, the junior servant, extinguished the remaining lamps in the dining hall, plunging it into near darkness. Piero slipped out through a servant's entrance, a small, unassuming door that led to a rarely used courtyard. From there, he navigated the winding service passages, emerging onto a quiet street in the Oltrarno district, far from the main palace gates. He had arranged for a contact, a shady dealer known for his discretion, to meet him in a hidden cellar. The night air was cool on his face, but a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. The chalice, hidden beneath his cloak, felt like a burning weight against his side. The theft was discovered the following morning, not by the guards, but by Cosimo I himself. The Grand Duke, an early riser, enjoyed a quiet breakfast in his dining hall. His eyes immediately went to the display cabinet, where the chalice usually resided, an empty space. The absence was jarring, like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. Cosimo's temper was legendary, and the silence that followed his discovery was far more terrifying than any shout. He summoned his captain of the guard, a formidable veteran named Baldassar. Baldassar's investigation was swift and ruthless. Every servant in the dining hall was questioned, every guard interrogated. The duplicate key was found, and through intense pressure, the junior servant Cosimo eventually broke, confessing his role and implicating Piero. The shame of his betrayal was immense. Piero, however, had vanished. He had sold the chalice to his contact, receiving only a fraction of its true value due to the rush and the risk. The contact, a cautious man, had immediately melted down the silver, destroying Cellini's masterpiece to extract its material worth and erase any identifying features. The sapphires, too, were removed and sold individually, their origins obscured. Piero fled Florence, managing to escape the Grand Duke's reach, though he lived the rest of his life as a haunted man, constantly looking over his shoulder. The chalice, the serpent's embrace, was never seen again. Cosimo I was deeply angered by the loss of Cellini's work, a symbol of his grandeur. He commissioned Cellini to create another masterpiece, even grander, but the original chalice remained a ghost in the annals of the Medici court, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of even the most treasured possessions to desperate men, and the relentless grip of vice. The melted silver, no longer art, simply joined the flow of currency, its artistic spirit forever extinguished. Number 6. The Vanished Tapestry of Cosimo. The year 1435, though only a few years after Cosimo de' Medici's return from exile, was a period of fragile political balance in Florence. Cosimo had solidified his power, but rival families and factions still bristled under his influence. To project an image of stability and to remind the populace of his triumphs, Cosimo commissioned a magnificent tapestry. It was a colossal piece, woven with incredible detail, depicting the triumph of Cosimo, a grand allegorical scene celebrating his return to Florence and the renewed prosperity he brought to the city. The tapestry, measuring an impressive 20 feet by 15 feet, dominated any wall it adorned. Its threads were a dazzling array of rich blues, deep reds, and shimmering golds, depicting Cosimo at the center, surrounded by figures representing virtue, prosperity, and the arts, all gazing admiringly upon him. The background showed a stylized Florence, its iconic dome and campanile rising majestically. The artisans of the San Frediano weaving workshops had toiled for years to create this masterpiece, their hands meticulously knotting each thread, their eyes straining to achieve the desired effect. The tapestry was a powerful piece of propaganda, a visual declaration of Medici ascendancy. Initially, the triumph of Cosimo was displayed in the Sala de Cinquecento, the great hall of the Palazzo della Signoria, the civic heart of Florence. This space, usually reserved for grand council meetings and public ceremonies, was a powerful symbol. However, during a period of renovations in 1435, the tapestry was temporarily moved to a less secure location, the Grand Hall of the Palazzo Rossi, a smaller, privately owned but publicly accessible palazzo near the Ponte Vecchio, which was often used for lesser civic functions. It was hung on a prominent wall, meant to serve as a temporary display, but the security here was far less stringent than at the Palazzo della Signoria. Guards were present, but their numbers were fewer, and their attention was often diverted by the comings and goings of merchants and citizens. The air in the Palazzo Rossi always carried a faint scent of old stone and the dampness of the Arno. The Florentine Popular Front, a clandestine group composed of disgruntled citizens and minor noble families who resented the Medici's increasing grip on power, saw the tapestry not as art but as an oppressive symbol. Their leader, a fiery orator named Niccolò di Marco, believed that if they could remove or destroy such a visible emblem of Medici power, it would ignite a broader rebellion and weaken Cosimo's authority. He had long plotted acts of symbolic resistance, but this was his most audacious plan yet. He assembled a small, dedicated team of 6 men, chosen for their discretion, strength, and unwavering loyalty to the Florentine Popular Front. They were artisans, laborers, and even a former soldier, all united by their shared grievance against the Medici. The night Niccolò chose for the theft was during the annual feast of St. John the Baptist, Florence's patron saint. The city would be alive with festivities, parades, and revelry, drawing guards and citizens away from less central areas. Firework displays would illuminate the sky, providing both cover and distraction. A light, festive haze hung over the city, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and celebratory wine. And Niccolò and his team had surveyed the Palazzo Rossi for weeks, noting the guard rotations, the weak points in the building security, and the best escape routes. They knew the tapestry was heavy, requiring considerable effort to remove. Just after midnight, when the feasting was at its peak, and the first fireworks began to burst over the Arno, Niccolò's team made their move. They approached the Palazzo Rossi from a quiet side street, disguised as revelers returning home late. The air was filled with distant cheers and the occasional boom of a firework. 2 of the men, disguised as tipsy youths, created a noisy diversion near the main entrance, drawing the attention of the lone guard on duty. While the guard was distracted, Niccolò and the others slipped through a less used service entrance that led directly to the Grand Hall. The lock on this door was old and rusted, yielding easily to a crowbar that one of the men had cleverly concealed beneath his cloak. Inside the Grand Hall, the silence was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the festival. The tapestry, illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the high windows, seemed to loom over them, its grand figures watching. It was immense. The men worked quickly and silently. One by one they unhooked the heavy tapestry from its iron rings along the top and sides of the wall. The metallic clicks were surprisingly loud in the quiet room, but they were quickly drowned out by the intermittent booms of the fireworks outside. The tapestry, once detached, sagged dramatically. It was surprisingly cumbersome, its weight considerable. They carefully folded the massive tapestry, a painstaking process that required all 6 men. The rich threads crinkled softly as they compressed it, creating a thick, unwieldy bundle. They had prepared a large, sturdy handcart disguised as a merchant's cart for delivering goods, waiting just outside the service entrance. With grunts and strained breaths, they hoisted the folded tapestry onto the cart, covering it with a tarp. Niccolò himself took the reins, his face grim with determination. His men, sweating despite the cool night air, melted back into the shadows of the revelers, their clothes now slightly disheveled. The theft was discovered the following morning by a junior civic official who arrived early to prepare the Grand Hall for a minor assembly. He entered the hall and immediately felt an unsettling emptiness. The wall, usually adorned with the vibrant tapestry, was bare, revealing patches of faded paint and dust where the threads had once rested, the iron rings hung idly like accusing fingers. His shout of alarm quickly brought the Palazzo Rossi's few guards and staff. The initial reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief. How could something so large and so valuable simply vanish? The guards, chastened and embarrassed, began a frantic search. The forced service entrance was quickly discovered, as were the faint drag marks on the stone floor. The Florentine authorities, under Medici influence, launched a full-scale investigation. Every porter, every merchant, every cart driver was questioned. But in the celebratory chaos of the Feast of St. John, thousands of carts and countless people had moved through the streets. The Florentine Popular Front, however, had no intention of keeping the tapestry. Niccolo di Marco had planned its demise. The tapestry was taken to a secluded hillside outside the city, where Niccolo and his men held a solemn, secret ceremony. There, beneath a pale dawn sky, they methodically cut the magnificent tapestry into 1,000 pieces. Each piece, a fragment of Cosimo's triumph, was then distributed among the members of the Popular Front, meant to be kept as a secret token of their resistance, a symbol of their defiance against Medici power. They would never be able to reassemble it. The triumph of Cosimo was never recovered. The pieces, too small to be valuable as art and too numerous to track, vanished into the private homes of Florentine citizens, silent testaments to a hidden act of rebellion. Cosimo de' Medici was greatly angered by the theft, recognizing it as a direct affront to his authority. He ordered a new, even grander tapestry to be woven, but the original remained a whispered legend, a testament to the fact that even the most formidable displays of power could be undone by the audacity of a few determined individuals. The empty wall in the Palazzo Rossi served as a silent, stark reminder of the fragile nature of even public displays of power. Number 5. The Duke's emerald-eyed falcon. The year 1550 saw Florence firmly under the absolute rule of Cosimo, the first de' Medici, who had recently consolidated his power as the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. His court was a dazzling spectacle of wealth and refinement, and his collections of art and precious objects were unparalleled. Among these treasures was a piece known as the Duke's Emerald-Eyed Falcon, not a painting or a sculpture, but a masterwork of goldsmithing and jewel setting, a testament to the exquisite craftsmanship of the Florentine workshops. This falcon was a truly breathtaking creation. It stood almost 2 feet tall, crafted from solid gold, its feathers meticulously etched and chased to give the illusion of lifelike plumage. Its talons gripped a sphere of polished lapis lazuli, symbolizing the world. But it was the falcon's eyes that truly captivated 2 enormous, perfectly matched emeralds, each the size of a pigeon's egg, cut with such precision that they seemed to gleam with an inner fire. The beak was made of polished obsidian, and its base was adorned with a cascade of smaller rubies and diamonds, resembling a spray of captured starlight. It was not merely a decorative object. It was a symbol of Cosimo's sharp vision, his predatory power, and his keen oversight of his dominion. The Duke's emerald-eyed falcon was housed in the Grand Duke's private treasury within the impenetrable walls of the Palazzo Pitti. This treasury was a vault within a vault, a heavily fortified chamber deep within the palace's lower levels, accessible only through a series of thick, iron-bound doors, each secured with multiple complex locks. Guards, drawn from Cosimo's most loyal Swiss mercenaries, stood watch day and night, their pikes gleaming in the dim light of the torch-lit corridors. The air in the treasury was cool and dry, carrying the faint metallic scent of countless coins and precious metals. Captain Marcus Thorne, a veteran mercenary who had served Cosimo for years, felt a creeping resentment fester within him. He had fought bravely in the Duke's Wars, secured his borders, and overseen the palace's security, yet he felt his efforts were unappreciated, his pay insufficient for the risks he took. He saw the Duke's lavish spending, the endless stream of new artworks and jewels, and felt a bitter envy. He had learned the intricate routines of the treasury, the guard rotations, the precise timings of the Duke's rare visits. He also knew of a secret passage, a dusty, forgotten ventilation shaft that led from an old, disused wine cellar to a small, hidden alcove within the treasury itself. It was a perilous route, narrow and dark, but accessible. Marcus, a man of ruthless cunning, believed the falcon was his ticket to a life of independent wealth, a life far from the endless demands of the Medici. He found 2 mercenaries loyal to him, not the Duke, and promised them a share of the immense riches. The night for the theft was chosen carefully. It was a week when Cosimo and his family were away on a hunting trip in the countryside, leaving the palace slightly less bustling, its inner security slightly relaxed. A fierce thunderstorm raged outside, its thunder rumbling through the stone walls of the Palazzo Pitti, providing an excellent cover for any unusual noises. The air was heavy and charged, the scent of rain carried on the wind. Marcus had meticulously planned every step, even sketching the layout of the treasury in secret. Just after midnight, while the storm was at its fiercest, Marcus and his 2 chosen accomplices, a burly, silent man named Klaus and a nimble, wiry man called Thomas, slipped into the palace's forgotten wine cellar. Marcus, using a key he had secretly procured, opened the heavy oak door that led to the disused section. The air here was damp and smelled of old wine and mildew. He then unlatched a heavy rusted iron grate, revealing the narrow, dark opening of the ventilation shaft. Klaus, the largest of the group, stayed behind to keep watch. Thomas, the most agile, squeezed into the cramped shaft first, his movements almost silent. Marcus followed, his large frame barely fitting through the tight space. The shaft was choked with dust and cobwebs, and the air was stale, making breathing difficult. They crawled on hands and knees through the inky blackness, the faint sounds of the storm outside echoing strangely in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, Thomas reached the end of the shaft. He carefully pushed against a loose stone panel, a disguised opening into the treasury. It shifted with a faint scrape. They emerged into the cool, silent chamber. The glow of the eternal lamp kept perpetually burning in the treasury, cast long, eerie shadows. The emerald-eyed falcon shimmered on its velvet stand, its emerald eyes seemingly watching them. The other guards in the treasury were in a distant section, their footsteps barely audible. Marcus and Thomas moved swiftly to the pedestal. The falcon was secured with a hidden locking mechanism that Marcus had observed during his patrols. Using a small, specially crafted key, he carefully disengaged the lock. The golden bird lifted free of its pedestal with surprising ease. They quickly wrapped the falcon in layers of thick felt cloth, obscuring its distinctive shape, and tucked it into a sturdy leather satchel Thomas carried. They then retraced their steps, crawling back through the ventilation shaft, the storm's roar now seeming like a triumphant song. Klaus met them in the wine cellar, his face grim but satisfied. They then quietly exited the palace, making their way through the storm-swept streets towards a pre-arranged rendezvous point, a small, unassuming fishing boat waiting in a secluded cove downriver from Florence, its sails already unfurled. The theft was discovered the following morning by the regular treasury guard, a grizzled veteran named Fabio who routinely checked the displays. He noticed the slight misalignment of the falcon's pedestal and the faint, almost imperceptible scuff marks on the floor around it. His immediate alarm brought the entire palace guard into a frenzy. The empty space where the glittering falcon had stood was a chilling sight. Cosimo I, upon his return from the hunting trip, was informed of the theft. His face, usually composed, turned ashen. The loss of such a unique symbol of his power was a deeply personal affront. The investigation was swift and brutal. Every guard, every servant with access to the lower levels of the palace was interrogated. The discovery of the secret ventilation shaft, a forgotten relic of earlier palace construction, pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the Pitti's hidden passages. Suspicion quickly fell upon Captain Marcus Thorne. His sudden disappearance from his post, along with 2 of his trusted men, was the final piece of the puzzle. Cosimo I immediately dispatched his most skilled trackers and a contingent of his elite horsemen to pursue the renegade mercenaries. Marcus Thorne and his accomplices made it to the coast, their fishing boat cutting through the choppy waters of the Ligurian Sea. They planned to reach a distant port, sell the Falcon, and disappear into the anonymity of the Mediterranean trade routes. But Cosimo's vengeance was swifter. His agents caught up with the boat just as it neared Corsica. A fierce skirmish ensued on the waves. The emerald-eyed Falcon was recovered, but it did not emerge unscathed. During the struggle, it had been knocked overboard. Though retrieved from the shallow waters, one of its magnificent emerald eyes had been dislodged and lost to the depths, forever marring its perfection. Marcus Thorne and his accomplices were captured and brought back to Florence in chains. Their fate was swift and merciless, a grim example of Cosimo's justice. The Duke's emerald-eyed Falcon was returned to the Palazzo Pitti, its remaining emerald eye still gleaming, but its missing counterpart served as a permanent, chilling reminder of the audacity of the theft and the ruthlessness required to reclaim what was lost. Cosimo ordered a smaller, less perfect emerald to be set in its place, but the original brilliance was gone, a silent casualty of ambition and greed. Number 4, Michelangelo's missing tools and a small carving. In the late 15th century, Florence buzzed with artistic energy, largely fueled by the patronage of Lorenzo the Magnificent. It was during this vibrant period that a young, intensely gifted Michelangelo Buonarroti found himself living in the Medici palace, learning from the greatest minds of the age, and developing his formidable talent in the Medici sculpture garden, a kind of informal academy for aspiring artists. Here, surrounded by ancient Roman statues and the works of his contemporaries, Michelangelo spent countless hours honing his craft, often working on small, personal projects in addition to his assigned tasks. One such project was a small marble relief, roughly the size of a man's hand, which he called Descent of Orpheus. It was an intensely personal piece, carved from a pristine block of Carrara marble, depicting the mythical Orpheus reaching back towards the underworld, a figure of profound sorrow and desperate hope. The detail was exquisite, even in its miniature form, the straining muscles, the flowing drapery, the delicate features of Orpheus's face, all rendered with a precision that belied Michelangelo's youth. This was not a commissioned work, but a piece he carved purely for his own satisfaction, kept tucked away in a small, locked wooden box in his workshop corner within the Medici gardens. He also kept a set of his most prized carving tools, a specific collection of fine chisels, mallets, and rasps in the same box, tools he had personally shaped and sharpened over many hours. Michelangelo's workshop, though within the secure confines of the Medici gardens, was less a fortress and more a busy open-air space where apprentices came and went. The garden itself was patrolled, but the focus was on the grand sculptures and the daily life of the Medici household, not the individual toolboxes of young artists. The air in the garden always carried the faint, sweet scent of cypress and marble dust, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Giulio, a slightly older apprentice who had been in the Medici sculpture garden longer than Michelangelo, felt a gnawing resentment. He was a talented sculptor in his own right, but he lacked Michelangelo's fire, his raw, undeniable genius. He watched with simmering envy as Lorenzo the Magnificent showered Michelangelo with attention and commissions, overlooking Giulio's own quieter contributions. Giulio believed Michelangelo was arrogant, undeserving of such swift recognition. He knew Michelangelo's habits, his intense focus, his occasional forgetfulness regarding the security of his personal belongings. He had also noticed the small wooden box tucked away from curious eyes and the quiet pride Michelangelo took in his Descent of Orpheus. Giulio's plan was not to steal the relief for profit, but to destabilize Michelangelo, to make him doubt himself, and to perhaps cause enough trouble to make Lorenzo question his protege's judgment. He would take the tools and the small carving, hoping the loss of both would send a clear, damaging message. The night Giulio chose was particularly cold and windy, the kind that kept most people indoors. The Medici palace and gardens were unusually quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the creak of distant branches. Giulio had waited until all other apprentices had retired to their quarters, and the night guard had completed his last patrol through the garden's main thoroughfares. He wore dark, simple clothes and moved with the quiet stealth of a frustrated artist. He had earlier propped open a rarely used garden gate, just enough for a swift exit. He approached Michelangelo's small workshop shed, a simple wooden structure at the edge of the garden. The latch on the shed door was a basic one, easily undone with a thin wire he had taken from his own tools. He slipped inside, the familiar scent of marble dust clinging to the air. The small space was dimly lit by the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy window panes. He located the wooden box, tucked beneath a workbench, just as he expected. Giulio worked quickly. The box itself was secured with a small brass padlock. He didn't bother trying to pick it. Instead, he simply used a small, strong chisel and a quiet tap of a mallet to shear off the flimsy brass loop that held the padlock in place. The sound was a soft snap, easily lost in the howl of the wind outside. He opened the box. Inside, nestled among a few scraps of cloth, were the gleaming tools and the small marble relief. His fingers closed around the smooth, cool surface of the Descent of Orpheus. He also gathered Michelangelo's favorite chisels, the ones with the distinctive, worn handles. He placed them all into a sturdy canvas bag he carried. Before leaving, in a moment of vengeful impulse, Giulio deliberately overturned a pot of fresh plaster and scattered a few of Michelangelo's half-finished sketches across the floor, hoping to make the scene appear more chaotic, less targeted. He then slipped out of the workshop, relatching the shed door as best he could. He hurried through the dark garden, exiting through the propped open gate, and disappeared into the labyrinthine alleys of Florence, the bag containing the stolen tools and the small carving clutched tightly in his hand. The theft was discovered the next morning by Michelangelo himself, who arrived at his workshop with his usual morning enthusiasm. The overturned plaster and scattered sketches immediately caught his eye. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He rushed to his workbench, his eyes immediately going to the wooden box. The sheared-off padlock, the empty space where his tools and the small relief should have been, confirmed his fears. His face, usually expressive, hardened into a mask of shock and anger. He immediately alerted the Medici household guards. The guards, though diligent, were initially baffled. The theft was peculiar. No large, valuable artwork was taken, no gold, no jewels, only a small, personal carving and a set of tools. They questioned Michelangelo, the other apprentices, and even the garden staff. The scattered sketches suggested a random act of vandalism, but the targeted nature of the stolen items suggested otherwise. Michelangelo, for his part, felt a deep sense of personal violation. The Descent of Orpheus was a piece of his soul, and the tools were an extension of his hand. He suspected a rival, but he had no proof. The Medici, specifically Lorenzo the Magnificent, though initially perplexed, took the matter seriously. Any slight against an artist under his patronage was an affront to his own reputation. He sent his own investigators to the garden, men who understood the subtle currents of envy and rivalry within the artistic community. They quickly dismissed the vandalism theory and focused on the possibility of an insider. Giulio, however, was cunning. He kept a low profile, his demeanor unchanged, and participated in the search for the stolen items with feigned concern. Giulio eventually destroyed the Descent of Orpheus. He found the small relief too beautiful, too much a testament to Michelangelo's genius, to keep. In a fit of frustrated rage and jealousy, he smashed it into unrecognizable fragments with one of Michelangelo's own stolen chisels, then scattered the pieces into the Arno River, hoping to erase all trace. He kept the stolen tools, however, using them in secret, a perverse trophy of his petty victory. He believed he had struck a blow against Michelangelo's rising star, though the effect was minimal. Michelangelo, deeply affected, poured his frustration into his larger, commissioned works, his resolve only hardening. The missing tools and the Descent of Orpheus were never recovered. The theft remained an unsolved mystery for the Medici, though the whispers of artistic rivalry continued to circulate. Giulio, though never caught, never achieved the fame he so desperately craved. He lived a life of quiet mediocrity, haunted by the stolen tools and the ghost of a small, perfect carving. Michelangelo, meanwhile, went on to create masterpieces that would define an era. his early loss serving as a silent, bitter reminder of the sharp edges of human envy. Number 3. The stolen Raphael miniature. The early 16th century, the High Renaissance shone brightly under the guiding hand of the Medici, specifically under Pope Leo X, born Giovanni de' Medici, who reigned from 1513. Leo X was a lavish patron of the arts, transforming Rome into a vibrant hub of artistic and intellectual activity, commissioning masterpieces from the likes of Raphael and Michelangelo. Among his personal treasures was a series of exquisite miniature portraits, intended as intimate gifts for powerful allies and close confidantes. One such miniature, a piece by the incomparable Raphael, was a particular favorite. This miniature, no larger than a man's palm, was known as the Cardinal's Gaze. It depicted a stern, yet subtly empathetic cardinal, his piercing blue eyes seeming to follow the viewer, his face rendered with an astonishing level of detail. Raphael had painted it on a thin slice of ivory, its surface meticulously polished to a smooth, almost translucent sheen. The colors were incredibly vibrant, the tiny brushstrokes barely visible, giving the portrait a lifelike quality that was uncanny for its size. It was framed in a delicate gold filigree inlaid with tiny sparkling diamonds. The miniature was intended as a discreet, personal gift from Pope Leo X to a key political ally in France, a gesture of diplomatic goodwill. The Cardinal's Gaze was not displayed in a grand gallery. Instead, it was kept in a small velvet-lined box in a secured cabinet within Pope Leo X's private study in the Vatican Palace. The study was a marvel of Renaissance design, its walls adorned with lesser-known frescoes, its shelves overflowing with illuminated manuscripts. The study was always under the watch of papal Swiss guards whose vigilance was legendary. The air was usually scented with fine parchment and the faint aroma of incense from the nearby Vatican chapel. Sergeant Alaric, a Swiss guard, had served the papacy for years, his loyalty unquestioning, his devotion to his duties absolute. However, a recent devastating blow had shattered his world. His younger sister in Switzerland had fallen gravely ill, and the cost of her specialized care was far beyond his meager earnings. Desperate, with his family's honor and his sister's life hanging in the balance, Alaric saw only one path to salvation: the immense wealth of the Vatican. He had witnessed the comings and goings in the Pope's study, the relative ease with which the smaller, more portable treasures were handled. He knew the cabinet's lock was complex, but he also knew its weak point: a faint creak when the key was turned in a specific way, a sound that, if masked, could allow for quiet entry. He also knew the precise timing of the Pope's private audiences and the guard's shifts. The night Alaric chose was one of hushed silence, broken only by the distant bells of Rome. A thick fog had rolled in from the Tiber, cloaking the Vatican in an ethereal shroud and muffling all sound. This provided excellent cover. Alaric was on the late-night shift, a trusted position that gave him unparalleled access to the palace's inner chambers. He had feigned a minor illness to ensure he was assigned to a less visible post that allowed him to move discreetly through the corridors. Just after the midnight changing of the guard, Alaric made his move. He moved through the hushed palace, his soft leather boots making almost no sound on the marble floors. The air was cool and damp from the fog. He reached Pope Leo X's private study, the main door locked but within his permitted access. He used his official key, turning it slowly, listening for the telltale creak. As he turned the key, he deliberately shuffled his feet, making a slight scraping sound that masked the creak of the lock. The heavy oak door swung silently inward. Inside, the study was a cavern of deep shadows, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the thick fog. He quickly located the secured cabinet, its dark wood almost invisible in the gloom. He produced a set of finely crafted lock-picking tools he had acquired through a clandestine contact in Rome. He worked with agonizing slowness, his breath held, his ears straining for any sound. The lock was intricate, but Alaric's hands were steady, his focus absolute. A series of soft, precise clicks eventually signaled his success. The cabinet door eased open with a whisper. He reached inside, his fingers brushing against the velvet lining of the box that held the miniature. He carefully lifted the small, heavy box out, its contents a hidden treasure. He quickly closed the cabinet, relocked it as best he could, and exited the study, ensuring the door was securely shut. He moved back through the palace, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his outward demeanor calm and composed. He made his way to a rarely used guard post near the Vatican walls, a place where he could make a quick, unnoticed exit. There, he swapped his guard uniform for plain dark clothes he had secreted away. The velvet box containing the cardinal's gaze was tucked into a hidden pouch in his tunic. He slipped out of the Vatican, disappearing into the thick Roman fog, leaving behind his duty and his sworn oath. He reached a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of Rome where a discreet contact awaited him. The contact, a shadowy figure in the underground network of illicit art dealers, examined the miniature under a small lamp. His eyes widened. He recognized Raphael's hand, the immense value. He paid Alaric a substantial sum in gold coins, far more than Alaric had ever seen, enough to save his sister and secure his family's future. Alaric, his mission accomplished, immediately booked passage on a ship bound for Genoa, planning to return to Switzerland by a circuitous route. The theft was discovered the following morning by Pope Leo X himself, who desired to show the miniature to a visiting cardinal. His hand reached for the velvet box, his fingers closing on empty air. The shock was immediate, a cold wave of disbelief. The cabinet door was locked, seemingly undisturbed. Only the faintest scratch on the lock plate, barely visible, hinted at a disturbance. The Pope Leo X, his face grim, immediately summoned his captain of the Swiss Guard. The investigation was launched with unprecedented zeal. The Vatican, usually a bastion of impenetrable security, had been breached. Every guard was questioned, every inch of the study scrutinized. The broken lock was discovered. Alaric's sudden absence, and the fact that he was the only guard on duty with access to that specific key, quickly made him the prime suspect. News of his sister's illness and his recent desperation also came to light. The papal authorities, aided by the powerful Medici intelligence network, pursued Alaric relentlessly. Alaric, however, managed to evade capture. He reached Switzerland, used the stolen money to save his sister, and lived out his days in quiet obscurity, never revealing his past or the immense risk he took. The cardinal's gaze, however, never reached its intended recipient. The illicit dealer, recognizing the high profile of the piece and the relentless pursuit by the Vatican, decided it was too dangerous to sell whole. He meticulously removed the diamonds from the frame, melting down the gold for its raw value, and then carefully, agonizingly scraped away the delicate paint from the ivory, destroying Raphael's masterpiece to eliminate any trace of its origin. The ivory was discarded, its artistic spirit erased, a tragic casualty of greed and the desperate gamble of a desperate man. Number 2, Botticelli's Lost Venus sketch. The vibrant era of Lorenzo the Magnificent, late 15th century Florence, was a golden age for artists. Sandro Botticelli, a favored painter of the Medici family, was at the height of his powers, creating masterpieces that defined the spirit of the Renaissance. His studio, a lively, often chaotic space near the Via Larga, was a hub of artistic activity, filled with the sense of fresh paint, linseed oil, and the faint aroma of the Arno River. Here, among canvases and plaster models, he worked on grand commissions and personal projects alike. Among his most cherished private works was a large preparatory sketch, nearly 6 feet by 4 feet, for his famed painting Primavera. This was not just a preliminary drawing, but a vibrant, almost finished work in itself, done in charcoal and white chalk on heavy paper, with touches of light watercolor washes to block in the colors. It depicted the central figures of the Primavera, Flora, Zephyr, and Spring in a dynamic composition, their forms rendered with Botticelli's characteristic grace and flowing lines. The sketch captured the initial burst of creative energy, the raw power of his vision, and, in some ways, possessed an even more immediate vitality than the finished oil painting. It was stored, unrolled, on a large wooden easel in a secluded corner of his studio, often covered with a light linen sheet to protect it from dust and curious eyes. The air in the studio was often thick, with the scent of solvents and the quiet sounds of brushes on canvas. Giovanni, a skilled but uninspired painter who ran a rival workshop across the city, harbored a deep, festering envy of Botticelli. He resented Botticelli's effortless grace, his constant flow of commissions from the Medici, and the seemingly endless wellspring of his genius. But Giovanni's own work, while competent, lacked the spark, the poetic flair that made Botticelli's art so celebrated. He desperately craved a piece of Botticelli's brilliance, something to prove his own worth, or perhaps to simply possess a fragment of what he could not create. He had heard whispers of the Primavera sketch, its raw beauty and its immense value, not in coin but in prestige. His plan was simple: acquire the sketch, not to sell it, but to study it, to absorb its secrets, and perhaps even to claim it as his own anonymously. The night Giovanni chose was the Florentine New Year, March 25th, when the city was immersed in celebrations and the streets were filled with revelers. This provided the perfect cover. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the festive sounds of music and laughter. Botticelli, like many artists, often worked late, but on this night he had gone to join the festivities, leaving his studio locked but unattended. Giovanni had bribed a former apprentice of Botticelli, a young man who had been dismissed for laziness, to provide him with a crude copy of the studio key and a map of the internal layout. Just before midnight, as the main square erupted with cheers and firecrackers, Giovanni approached Botticelli's studio from a narrow, unlit alley. He was dressed in dark, unassuming clothes, his face partially obscured by the shadows. The alley smelled faintly of damp stone and the distant smoke from celebratory bonfires. He found the sturdy oak door, its familiar iron hinges gleaming faintly in the moonlight. He inserted the crude copy of the key. It was a tight fit, but with a slight jiggle and a soft click, the lock yielded. The door swung open with a faint groan, revealing the dark interior of the studio. Inside, the studio was a silent, sprawling space filled with the ghosts of unfinished works. The air was cool and still, carrying the lingering scent of paints. Giovanni moved with surprising speed, his eyes scanning for the easel in the corner. He found it, a tall, shadowy outline. He carefully lifted the linen sheet that covered the sketch, revealing the breathtaking composition beneath. Even in the dim light, the figures seemed to move, their lines flowing with an almost liquid grace. He carefully detached the large sheet of paper from the easel, its surface surprisingly delicate. Folding, it was out of the question. It would surely crack the charcoal. He had to roll it. He quickly found a sturdy, hollow wooden tube, usually used for storing rolled canvases, and meticulously, with agonizing slowness, rolled the large sketch around it. The paper crinkled softly, the only sound in the quiet studio. Once rolled, it formed a cylinder nearly 6 feet long, awkward but manageable. He secured it with twine. He then slipped out of the studio, relocking the door with equal care, leaving no immediate sign of forced entry. He carried the rolled sketch like a precious burden, moving through the quieter, deserted back streets of Florence, avoiding the main celebrations. He eventually reached his own workshop, where he immediately unrolled the sketch onto a large, empty table. Under the light of a flickering oil lamp, he gazed at Botticelli's work, a mixture of awe and bitter triumph in his eyes. He meticulously examined every line, every wash of color, hoping to absorb the genius through osmosis. The theft was discovered the following morning by Botticelli's chief assistant, Filippo, who arrived to prepare the studio for the day's work. He immediately noticed the missing linen sheet and the empty easel in the corner. His heart sank. He knew the significance of that sketch. A frantic search began. The studio was thoroughly examined, but there was no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It seemed as though the sketch had simply vanished into thin air. Botticelli, upon hearing the news, was deeply troubled. He valued that sketch not just for its artistic merit, but as a direct link to his creative process. He suspected a rival artist, someone who would understand its value, but he had no proof. The Medici, specifically Lorenzo the Magnificent, also heard of the loss. While not a piece for public display, the theft of such a valuable work from a favored artist was a blow to Florentine prestige. Lorenzo dispatched his agents discreetly to investigate, focusing on the city's network of artists and art dealers. Giovanni kept the Primavera sketch hidden in his workshop for months, poring over it, attempting to replicate its lines to understand its magic, but he could not. The spark remained elusive. Eventually, out of fear of discovery, or perhaps out of frustration with his inability to replicate Botticelli's genius, he made a drastic decision. He carefully cut the large sketch into several smaller, less recognizable pieces, each containing a fragment of the figures, a hand, a draped limb, a part of a face. He then sold these fragments individually, anonymously, to unsuspecting collectors and minor patrons, claiming they were studies by a master, but never naming Botticelli. He ensured no single piece could be identified as part of the original large sketch. Botticelli's Las Venus sketch was never recovered in its entirety. The fragments, scattered across private collections, were eventually lost to time, their true origin and artistic value obscured by Giovanni's act of jealous destruction. Giovanni, though never caught, never found the fame he craved. He remained a competent but unremarkable painter, forever living in the shadow of the genius he tried to steal, a silent testament to the corrosive power of envy in the dazzling world of Renaissance art. The empty easel in Botticelli's studio served as a constant, quiet reminder of the brilliance that was lost. Number 1. The missing Donatello. The year 1433 was a tumultuous one for Florence. Cosimo de' Medici, the shrewd banker and political mastermind, had been exiled by his powerful rivals, chief among them the Albizzi family. His beloved Palazzo Medici, a symbol of his family's immense wealth and influence, lay temporarily in the hands of the Florentine Republic, its treasures ostensibly protected but vulnerable in the shifting political winds. Among the magnificent artworks within its walls was a small, exceptionally precious bronze statue by Donatello, a master sculptor of the early Renaissance and a close friend of Cosimo. This bronze, known as the Little Shepherd, was one of Donatello's early intimate pieces rarely seen by the public. It stood barely a foot high, depicting a young, slender shepherd boy, his pose one of quiet contemplation, perhaps holding a lost lamb. The bronze had a rich, dark patina, gleaming softly in the light, and its details were exquisite: the delicate folds of the boy's tunic, the individual strands of his curly hair, the gentle expression on his face. It was a masterpiece of emotional depth, a testament to Donatello's revolutionary naturalism. Cosimo had commissioned it personally and cherished it, keeping it in his private study, a small, quiet room adjacent to the family's main living quarters in the palazzo. The air in the study usually smelled of aged leather and burning beeswax. The study, while luxurious, was not a heavily guarded vault. It was a personal space, protected by the general security of the vast palazzo and the assumed reverence for such artistic treasures. The main door was usually locked at night, but the window, though barred, was old and offered a potential point of entry for a determined intruder. The Albizzi family, while in control of the government, were eager to solidify their power and, more importantly, to publicly humiliate Cosimo and his supporters. They saw the art within the Medici palace as spoils of a political victory, but their focus was primarily on public declarations and the confiscation of property, not petty theft. Marco Pazzi, a distant relative of the powerful Pazzi family, a rival to the Medici, saw an opportunity for a different kind of blow. He was a man of cunning and quiet ambition, deeply resentful of the Medici's wealth and their hold over Florence. He believed that stealing a prized personal possession from Cosimo, a piece of art that symbolized his taste and his patronage of Donatello, would be a more subtle yet equally potent act of humiliation than any public confiscation. He envisioned the theft as a message even in exile. Cosimo's most cherished possessions were not safe. He was not interested in selling the bronze. He wanted to keep it, a private trophy of his defiance. The night Marco chose was dark and blustery, a late autumn storm lashing at the city with cold rain and wind. The bad weather kept most people indoors, and the few guards patrolling the Palazzo Medici were focused on staying dry, their attention less keen than usual. The rhythmic drumming of rain on the stone roof and the howl of the wind provided excellent cover for any sounds. Marco had studied the Palazzo Medici for weeks, observing the change of guards, the layout of the private quarters, and the specific route to Cosimo's study. He knew the window was old. Just after midnight, Marco approached the palazzo from a secluded side alley, hidden by the driving rain. He wore a dark, heavy cloak that blended with the shadows. He carried a small, sturdy ladder and a thin, hardened steel bar. He positioned the ladder against the side of the palazzo, beneath the window of Cosimo's study. The stone was slick with rain, but his movements were precise and quick. He climbed the ladder, the sounds of his ascent muffled by the storm. He reached the window. The heavy iron bars were old, set into the stone, but a few of the rivets were loose, weakened by centuries of weather. Using the steel bar as a lever, Marco quietly, methodically pried at the loose rivets. Each groan of metal was swallowed by the wind. After a grueling 10 minutes, he managed to create enough space to squeeze his body through the opening. He slipped into the study, landing softly on the rich Persian rug. The air inside was cool and still, a stark contrast to the storm outside. The study was dark, but Marco's eyes were accustomed to the gloom. He quickly located the small display pedestal on Cosimo's desk, recognizing the faint silhouette of the little shepherd. He moved swiftly, his heart pounding in his chest. His fingers closed around the smooth, cool bronze. It was heavier than he expected, but easily manageable. He carefully lifted it from its pedestal, the absence of the object creating a sudden, almost chilling emptiness in the room. He tucked the statue securely inside a padded pouch he wore beneath his cloak. He then retreated through the window, reversing his path. He removed the ladder, wiped away any visible footprints from the mud, and vanished into the storm-swept streets of Florence, leaving no obvious trace of his entry or exit. The rain continued to fall, washing away any remaining evidence. The theft was discovered the following morning by Niccolo Cosimo's loyal chamberlain, who entered the study to prepare it for the day. His gaze immediately fell upon the empty pedestal. A cold dread washed over him. He rushed forward, confirming the terrible truth. The small, intimate bronze Cosimo's cherished Donatello was gone. He immediately alerted the temporary Florentine government, now controlled by the Albizzi, though he knew the response would be politically charged. The Albizzi, upon hearing of the theft, were initially furious. This was a private matter, an embarrassment within their temporary domain. But as their investigation progressed, they realized the theft was not for profit. Nothing else was taken from the study, only the little shepherd. The subtle, almost surgical nature of the theft pointed to a specific target and a clear message. Whispers of Pazzi involvement began to circulate, but there was no concrete evidence. The damaged window bars were quickly noted, but no one could place Marco Pazzi at the scene. Marco Pazzi, meanwhile, took the little shepherd to his secluded villa in the Tuscan countryside, far from prying eyes. He did not boast of his deed, nor did he attempt to sell the bronze. Instead, he kept it hidden in a secret compartment beneath his hearth, occasionally retrieving it to gaze upon it, a silent, personal trophy of his defiance against the Medici. He derived immense satisfaction from the knowledge that Cosimo, wherever he was in exile, would be mourning its loss. The missing Donatello, the little shepherd, was never officially recovered by the Medici. It disappeared into the shadows of political rivalry, its true fate known only to a few. Cosimo de' Medici, upon his triumphant return to Florence in 1434, was deeply saddened by the loss of his beloved bronze. He commissioned Donatello for even grander works, such as the Bronze David, to fill the void, but the personal connection to the little shepherd remained. Marco Pazzi lived his life with his secret, the small bronze a constant, quiet reminder of his audacious act, a silent testament to the hidden battles fought in the gilded cages of Renaissance power. The empty pedestal in the Palazzo Medici remained a subtle wound, a mark of the invisible forces that constantly challenged even the greatest of dynasties.